morning. Hey, Jeffrey, good to see you, brother. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the Studio Q show live. My name is Quinn Jacobson, and whenever or wherever you're watching this from, welcome and thanks for showing up. Whether it's now or later, it doesn't matter. You can all catch up. So good to see everybody. I hope everybody's healthy and happy and doing well. I did post a couple of links pre-show here. The early Black photographers, we'll talk about that in a minute. The reason that link doesn't work is it's connected to the recommended watching up there. Just grab it from HTML back and you'll be able to find it. Or just search Smithsonian African American photography and you'll find that. So we have something interesting to do today. We're going to do a little bit of a dive on dry collodion in Sutton's honor. This book is called Wet and Dry Processes. So we're gonna look at the dry process. Here's the thing about the dry collodion process. It is very easy to do. If you're doing wet plate, this is a real easy transition if you ever want to try it. We'll talk about the upsides, downsides. We're going to look at two different variations, the Major Russell tannin process, and we'll also look at Sutton's own rapid process, and we'll talk about that too. I think you'll like it. Pablo, you're on YouTube. Good to see you. I thought you'd be scattering out. He had some business to take care of. We'll see him next week, though. Hey, good morning, Steve. I hope you get something out of this. Steve Wilson likes to do dry collodion a lot. There's a lot of folks that like dry collodion. I'll talk about what I like, what I don't like, those kinds of things about it. And Thilo, hello. Good to see everybody. Thanks for dropping in. And of course, we have the regular stuff going on today. Let me just jump in here and oh, Maureen. Hello, Maureen from Boston. Good to see you. Let's go ahead and share this over. Get in the share screen mode and get our little man. If I didn't do these presentations, I would be rambling on for days. This is for everybody's benefit. So let's do this. We know today is Saturday, August 28th, 2021. We are almost over August. I cannot believe it. And this is, like we said, the Studio Q show live. Today, the dry collodion process, like I said, we'll look at a couple of them. Same book. We've been in for weeks here. A little bit of news and social media, technical questions and answers, recommended reading, recommended watching. Pretty straightforward there. So let's jump into this. This was fascinating. I think this is a very important piece of photographic information to be aware of, because we don't hear this a lot, right? We're in kind of an island when it comes to these processes and all the names we talk about. We just don't hear about African American or any other ethnicity working in these processes early on. And Smithsonian this last week acquired rare photographs from the first African American studios, daguerreotypes by James P. Ball, Glenn Alvin Goodrich, and Augustus Washington. They're the centerpiece of the collection that could rewrite early history of American photography. Like I said, the links in the YouTube and the private chat, if you don't have it, or if it doesn't work like Pablo said, just copy it from HTML back and you'll find it. Or just Google it, you'll find it. Very interesting article. It's short, it's a quick read, but keep this stuff in mind. I think we lose a lot when we're so short-sighted and so narrow on some of this thinking in the history of photography. So, hello, Linda from Sweden, and Jan. Good to see you, brother. So there's a little bit of news and social media. Let's do the social media part. I've been trying to spend a little more time on FaceBag and my Facebook wet collodion page. I call it face bag. It's like a big roll of toilet paper just scrolls onto, it's a, if I had my druthers, I'd just clip the whole thing, but people get their information there. It's a good place to put the word out if you need to. So there was this gentleman, Josh Schultz. He posted this. He said, do exposure times get longer with aged collodion? I tried taking a few shots the other day and had very dark images. I'm trying to figure out if it was a collodion developer or the subject matter. Both developer and collodion were in glass bottles for 4 months since last use. So there's a couple entries there. And I went down, you can see my post. I said, Can anybody tell him why old aged red collodion slows down in speed, ISO? And I said, a free cup of coffee for the right answer. Wink, wink. I asked this because we've been going through Thomas Sutton's book on wet and dry collodion the last few weeks of the Studio Q Show Live. We've addressed this question in detail. And then Will, I know you're here, Will, because I just said hi to you. Will chimed in and he said, yeah, it's the collodion, the salts, basically the iodide, releasing free iodine into the collodion. That's absolutely correct. That's why it turns red. Let's expound on this. This is such a great topic because I want you guys to see what Sutton says. This is from the Illustrated Photographer, October 29th, 1869, by Thomas Sutton, B.A., our trusted and true friend that we've been studying for a few weeks. Check this out. This is wonderful. Effect of free iodine in collodion. So I'm going to take Will's comment, which is absolutely correct. I owe you a cup of coffee, Will. I'm going to take his comment and stretch it a little bit further through Sutton's words. It has often been observed that one cannot cure a fogging bath, a silver bath that fogs, by simply adding nitric acid to it, whilst a bright negative is at once obtained by adding a little free iodine to the collodion. Why is this? It is generally understood that the addition of free iodine to collodion causes the liberation of nitric acid in the bath, so that the one remedy ought to be good as the other, yet they are not so. Why is this again, right? I will endeavor to explain this apparent anomaly. It's true that free iodine in the collodion causes a liberation of nitric acid in the bath, the silver bath. So that red iodine in the collodion, as it turns red, the salt releases free iodine in. That's why it turns red, right? Iodine's red. It liberates nitric acid in the silver bath. But that's only part of the truth. It's not the whole truth, he says. Something more than this is done. Iodic acid or iodic acid is formed and set free, as well as nitric acid, and that appears to be much more powerful restraining agent. So we're talking about this other acid now released in the silver bath. And let me jump over here. We'll come back to this, but let me just show you this. Iodic acid, is it a strong acid? And it's a relatively strong acid. It's strongly oxidizing in acidic solution, less so in basic solution. So when iodic acid acts as an iodizer, then the product of the reaction is either iodine or iodide ion. So you get the connection here. It's a restraining agent. So when the collodion turns red, goes into your bath, releases nitric acid and this other acid, iodic acid, and it's a restraining. It's quite a strong acid, and it retards or holds back. So that's why your collodion slows down when it's red. It's not just the collodion, it's the silver bath acting as well too. We talked about this in Sutton's book. I know you'd have to go back through hours of video to find it, but this is the reason. And then let's just finish this real quick. Iodic acid is composed of 1 atom of iodine to 5 atoms of oxygen, and the way in which it is formed in the presence of silver nitrate in solution is thus expressed. 5 atoms of silver nitrate plus 6 atoms of iodine equal 5 atoms of silver iodide. That's our halogen. Plus 5 atoms of nitric acid plus 1 atom of iodic acid. The reader will remember that this is a characteristic of iodine to have a greater affinity for oxygen than the other halogens, bromide and chlorine, have. If, for instance, you take an aqueous solution of these 3 halogens and expose them to light, the water will be found to contain only hydrobromic and hydrochloric acids in the latter cases. But in the case of iodine water, it will contain hydroiodic and iodic acids. This difference explains some of the peculiarities of silver iodide, which distinguish it from the bromides and chlorides. So what he's saying there is this AgI, or silver iodide, is formed through these complex chemical transformations, and it causes, now somebody wrote as well too on the board this morning, and I answered, this isn't a bad thing, right? It prevents fogging. That's why you add he started the article out, that's why you add nitric acid to your bath, to kill fogging, right? So it holds back. With a new collodion, an old bath, you fog, right? That kind of thing. And Iodine also gives you the contrast or tonal range. So these are not bad things. It's just you need to maintain your silver bath and all those things we've talked about in the past. So I thought that was I thought that was an interesting overview of that. Oh, the red collodion is slow. Why? Let's talk about why. Why is that? Jump into it a little bit. I'm a why guy. I want to know, right? Give me the science on it. Give me the facts on it. I want to know why. So, yes, Jeffrey, I owe Will a coffee on that. At least that first portion anyway, huh? He's right. It releases, that's the first component. That salt in your collodion starts to break down, oxidize, and releases the iodine. Then that iodine goes into your silver bath and creates this nitric acid, iodic acid, and iodic acid, however you want to say it, and starts this process of restraining, slowing down. And that's what you need, right, to prevent fogging. We're not talking about veiling. That's a heat and too little acid in the developer. That's veiling. You can wipe off. This is fogging, like a light leak, but it's caused from the pH being too high in the silver bath, or this release of a new collodion that hasn't released that iodine to create this process. Not a bad thing. Hola, hola, Arlequin, collodionista, muy bueno. Okay, good. All right, so I hope that's worthwhile. Reading that, you can grab that article out of the illustrated photographer. So let's talk about dry collodion. What is the dry collodion process? It's the same as the wet collodion process, except for a couple of extra steps to preserve the plate. So you're going through the process just like making a positive or a negative in wet collodion. And these, I'll talk about the steps here, but this is just an added step to preserve the sensitivity, if you will, of the plate and be able to store it and not have to have it wet for exposure. So the advantage of the dry process is obvious. You can travel and get access to places and not need a portable darkroom. That was the big thing, right? Man, I can just load up a few plate holders with these dry collodion plates and off I go. Now, don't confuse this with gelatin dry plates. This is different. This is dry collodion process, not gelatin. Gelatin is more like film. That's a more modern version of it. There are two downsides to the process. The exposures are a lot longer, just straight up, but we're gonna talk about a caveat here. Mr. Sutton's gonna give us a way into getting the same types of exposures as wet collodion with dry collodion. We'll talk about that. You need several plate holders, right? You can't just use one plate holder and switch it out in the field. You need several loaded up, just like film, sheet film. And you get a different aesthetic, more like silver gelatin film. That's my opinion. Now, you may differ on that, and that's fine. But the dry collodion process has a different aesthetic to my eye. There's something about this fluidity of the collodion, the wet process, that gives it that unique look and feel. Negatives can be more standard if you really work toward that. But the dry collodion process is a little different aesthetically. And so there's a couple of different methods to make dry collodion plates. We're going to talk about the tannin process of Major Russell, as well as the Sutton's rapid dry collodion process. Okay. Oh, Farrad, I go too fast. Fareed says, I actually added 5 drops into my silver and hoped to lower the pH of 4.4 and 4.5. These drops didn't really change. Yeah. So here's my yeah, you don't want to, you want to be careful. Here's my take on that. Back to the silver nitrate bath. If you're trying to lower the pH, make it a more acidic bath. If you're at pH 5 and you want to make positives and you want to be pH 3 or 4, somewhere in there, here's my general rule to accomplish that. If you're using 70% plus pure nitric acid, 70% or higher, not 3%, not 10%, but 70% to 80%, somewhere in there, 10 drops per liter will drop at 1 pH point. So 10 drops would take it from pH 5 to pH 4. And your 5 drops may have been 20% nitric acid. That's not going to do much. You're going to have to extrapolate that and figure out where you fall. The only thing, if you add too much nitric acid to your bath, it's obvious what's going to happen. Your ISO is going to drop. Your plate, you're going to have a lot. You think red collodion's slow. And the color of your images are going to be more of a silver gelatin, a cool tone, not that warm color that we get, that yellow, red, brown color we get with positives. 67%. So you add another 5 drops or 6, 7 drops to that, Fareed, you'll drop it down. Don't be afraid to do that. Yeah, you're right there on the border. So follow that recommendation. I bet you'll find that works out for you. Don't be afraid to add another 5 or even 10 drops. In a liter. I'm talking a liter, as long as you have a liter. So this is interesting. Does anyone know what tannins are? Yeah, go play again, Freed. Let us know. Yeah, let me know how you make out with that. Anybody know what tannins are? Tannins are very interesting, and I'll tell you a quick story here. We're up on the mountain here in Colorado, in the Rocky Mountains of the United States, in the state of Colorado. Up here, away from everybody, you don't have city or county water, right? You got to punch your own well. You have to make your own water source. So we drilled our well a few years ago. It's about 290 feet deep. I have a pump set down at about 160 feet, and it pumps water out of the earth. We broke up the granite, created a little aquifer, if you will. Water comes through, we pump it up to our house. Well, the last few months in the spring, we've had a lot of rain in the summer as well too. But you can imagine up here in the mountains, the amount of vegetation, pine cones and needles and leaves and everything that falls on the ground for hundreds of thousands of years, right? Thousands of years anyway, the more recent stuff. That all decomposes and sinks down into the earth. And Fareed's right. It's the acid of trees. Absolutely correct. And not only trees, but any organic material. And as the rains came in the spring and summer, it pushed all that decomposed organic material down into our well. And guess what I had coming out of my faucet? I had water loaded with tannins. It looked like almost like a light tea color, right? And tannins are in tea and coffee and all kinds of stuff. The word comes from tanning hides. Yeah, tea can lower pH too. Yep, exactly. Well, what I ended up doing to get rid of the tannins in the water, we drank it. Doesn't hurt you, really, especially in those quantities. But man, it puts a ring in your toilet. It's just, you fill up a glass of water. It's just an off color. It doesn't look good. So I had to get a tannin remover system and put in my water system, in my well system. Water is great now, no problem. But these tannins are what we use in the dry collodion process to preserve the plate. And we'll talk about that. So tannins are naturally occurring compounds that exist inside of grape skins, seeds, and stems. That's not the only place, but generally speaking, right? The scientific word for these compounds is polyphenols. Polyphenols. Plants have tannins to make themselves unpalatable or taste nasty. Their purpose in nature is to deter animals from eating a plant's fruit or seeds before it's ripe. Tannins are responsible for that astringent mouth-coating feeling you get from biting into an unripe pear or plum. So this is the crux. This is the main thing that we're going to use in this dry collodion process to preserve the plate. Talked about tanning hides. We're going to preserve and tan the hide of a glass plate here to preserve that. Yes, that's right, Fareed. That's good. I figured you might know about these. So let's look right out of we see chapter 7 here. He does the wet and the dry processes in the book we've been going through. Same book, The Collodion Process, Wet and Dry, Thomas Sutton, 1862. This is the tannin process. So he goes quickly through the first steps, and everyone working in wet plate will recognize all of these, except for the last, except for a couple intermediate ones. Having ground the edge of the glass plate, cleaned it, and applied the preliminary coating, and is ready for use. The operations are as follow. Collodionize the plate. Now, here's the first catch. You can't use iodide only collodion. It needs to be bromo-iodized collodion. We're going to talk about why that is. The same as for the wet process, and excited in the same silver nitrate bath. That's a bath acidified with nitric acid in the proportion of 1 drop of nitric acid to every 150 grains of silver. That's about 7 drops in a liter. Yes, that's right, Freed. Also used tannins are also used to tone cyanotypes, green tea. Yep, exactly right. So he's using a bromoiodized collodion, basically which everyone uses for positives, right? And he's acidified that bath with about 7 drops to a liter. So that if you start out at pH 4 or 5, you're going to drop it down. It's let's say 3 to 4, somewhere in there, right? It's a basic acidified silver bath for positives. Wash the so here we go. You take it out of the silver bath after X amount of minutes. In the summer, it might be 2 minutes. In the winter, it might be 4 or 5 minutes, depending on your situation. Till those rivulets are gone, just like a positive. Pull it out of the silver bath. Wash the film thoroughly in order to remove the silver nitrate. Now, the caveat here is don't use your tap water if it's full of chloramines and other stuff. Use distilled water, at least for the first rinses to get the greasy stuff off. Don't use tap water on it. Use distilled water. Wash that off, and then you can put it under the tap water after that silver's gone. Apply a solution of tannin to the film and let it dry. He's just going through the overall steps here. Expose, develop, fix, and varnish the plate. The mode of collodionizing and exciting the plate has already been described and need not be repeated. On removing the plate from the silver nitrate bath, immerse it at once in a bath of distilled water. So here we go, taking it out of the silver bath into the distilled water. An upright gutta percha bath, just a clay bath, basically a tank, is best to employ. All the greasy lines, or we call them rivulets, which were seen on the first immersion of the plate in the nitrate bath, now return, but they soon disappear. The film is now deprived of the greater portion of the silt-free nitrate. So what he's saying, just like I said, you pull it out of your silver nitrate bath. He's recommending you put a tank in, but you use a tray with some distilled water and wash it until you don't see those rivulets anymore. And what he's saying is the large portion of that free silver nitrate is now gone. Now it may safely be washed in common water to remove the remainder. It is impossible to wash the plate too much. In other words, you're not going to wash it so much it desensitizes, right? You've already embedded the AGI and AGBR in it. It's done. It may be washed either by immersion in another upright bath or by pouring water over it from a jug or faucet, right? The former plan is much the best because every part of the film is then equally washed. The same distilled water may be used for several plates. So he's saying if you have a pan of silver water or a tank of silver or distilled water, you could put those plates coming out of the silver bath, that initial wash, in that over and over again. And the silver thus collected may be thrown to chloride. Harry, I'm surprised he doesn't mention Mr. Bailey, right? To return your silver chloride and get your silver nitrate in return. The plate is now ready to receive the solution of tannin, the object of which is to give vigor and density to the negative. Excuse me. The details of which would otherwise be extremely thin and the only visible by reflected light, meaning it would be more like a positive. It's not strong enough as a negative, etc. The tannin gives density to the negative, but impairs the sensitivity of the film. So there's the catch right there, right? Gives the density, but impairs the sensitivity, meaning it's going to be slow. And we'll talk about exposure here in just a second. So here's the solution of tannin, really simple. I used to, in my studio in Denver, when we had time from a positive class, teaching a positive ambrotype tintype workshop, I'd say, hey, let's run a dry collodion plate and see what you think. And so I showed them how to do it. I had tannin mixed up, everything. I didn't go through all the chemistry. And then they go outside with their camera, do a 4 or 5 minute exposure, come back in with pyro, develop it, etc. And my personal opinion is if you're doing wet plate collodion, you'll get out of this video what you need to do dry collodion. You really will. And if you don't, holler at me, but you'll get a good start on it anyway. It's really simple if you're already doing wet collodion. And so here's the solution. 28.9 mils of distilled water and 0.97 grams of tannin. Tannin is easy to get. You can get it from Mike at Artcraft. You can get it pretty much anywhere. You can get it anywhere. And you can extrapolate that out how much ever you want to use. But let's talk about what's important here with the tannin. Shake well up together. And when dissolved, filter through a blotting paper. I've never had to do that, but that's probably, might use a coffee filter if you want. Do not make more than you require for present use. That's important. Don't make more than you need, and never use a stale solution. So basically, it's kind of like pyrogallic acid, kind of like all those other things we talked about. Make enough for what you're going to use, and then don't make any more. Don't make a bunch and put it on your shelf and wait. Use it right away, fresh, and don't use stale tannin. After the plate has been well washed, hold it horizontally and pour over it enough tannin solution to cover it completely. Let this flow 3 or 4 times backwards and forwards over the plate, right? Kind of like varnishing. Just let it kind of soak in there up to every edge and corner, and then run it off into the sink. Never use the same tannin solution a second time. By using stale tannin or tannin contaminated with previous contact with excited collodion film, you run the great risk of getting flat, dirty negatives. Really weak, really nasty negatives. I've done this. I've seen it. I didn't know about the use of tannin when I first started doing that. Richness of color and purity in the lights are due to the use of fresh made tannin solution, and which has never been in contact with the former sensitive film. Wipe the back and the edges of the plate and set it up to drain to dry in a dark box made for this purpose. So what he's saying there, after you get it flowed, drain the tannin off, clean the back off, blot the edges off, get it to where it's not dripping anymore, and then have it like it, not a paper box, but a box where you can set these plates, or a rack where you can put them and cover them and have them dark and let them dry. That's what he's saying there. He's saying specially made for that. But you could probably, if you got into it, you'd probably want to do that. The plate must rest with its 2 bottom corners upon 2 raised strips of wood nailed to the bottom of the box. So what he's talking about there, you don't want the plate sitting on a paper towel, pulling all that, wicking all that solution off. You want it on a hard wood surface, something raised, something that doesn't wick that solution off the plate. That's basically what he's saying there. In this way, only the corners of the plate touch the wood and not the edges. The plates, when thoroughly dry, are ready for exposure in the camera. And it doesn't take long to dry, really, it doesn't. We used to do it, put their plates in the dark room, and we'd come back in 20, 30 minutes. I mean, I know in Colorado, dry, summertime, all that, but it doesn't take long. Exposure in the camera. But before putting them into the dark slides, or dark back, it's a wise precaution to dry them before a hot flat iron. So what he's saying is just to make sure everything's dry. Don't take a chance, just like your prints, your paper, that kind of stuff. Don't take a chance, and just get a little bit of heat over it, just to, not super hot, just to make sure that water's gone. So here's why. If any part of that plate is damp when exposed, that part will yield miserably thin, dirty patch negative, devoid of detail. So it's the opposite of wet plate, right? This is dry plate collodion. This is dry collodion. That emphasis on dry, emphasis on wet, both respectively, the processes. Another important point is to observe is that unless the plates are surface dried at a tolerably uniform temperature, the outlines of the patches which have dried irregularly will be seen in the negative. So if you run into this problem, it means that you've dried you've had areas on the image dry sooner than others, right? And some of them are still damp. Farid says, let's see. Let's see. Let me go back here. Hi, all. Last week I spent good. Excellent. Welcome, Mr. Analog. That's good to hear. We're glad you enjoyed that. I was wondering about this tannin process last month when I read your book. Yes, this is, if you're doing white collodion, run at least a couple of dry plates. You might fall in love with it. You might find a new bailiwick. You might absolutely love it. It does, if you're doing outdoor landscape type images, this can really save you a lot of time and energy and effort. As long as you have enough plate holders to go out on scene, you got enough light, you learn your exposures and all that. This is a process you could really fall in love with. So you tan after the plate is dried, after the silver. Farid, you put the tannin on after it comes out of the silver bath into a distilled water bath until your rivulets are gone, and then you wash in, under a faucet for, I'd say 3-4 minutes. You can't overwash it. Then you go to the tannin and flow it back and forth, flow it over the tannin, let that drain, and then you dry the plate and it's ready to use. Yes. So, okay, where were we? So if it dries differently, is what he's saying here. If you have one point that's still kind of damp or moist, and you have another spots that aren't, you're going to see those in the negative. Thus, you must not begin to dry a wet tannin plate at a high temperature by putting a hot iron into the box. In other words, he said, don't put a heater in your box, right? Just let it dry naturally. Let nature take care of that. Don't put it on the heat, so to speak. Let's see. Only visible half dry, remove the iron or let it get cold without introducing another. The plate should either be allowed to get the surface dry at the common temperatures or ambient temperatures of the room, or temperatures should be gradually raised until they are quite dry. So that should make sense, right? Just don't do anything extreme with them. I say let them dry on their own. Just don't have anything that'll wick that solution off. Keep it on wood or plastic or something like that. So here's exposure. Expose for about 4 minutes with a sunlighted view taken with a stereoscopic camera and a P-stop. Let's talk about that real quickly. That's kind of funny. What he's saying is go out and have a bright day, and P-stop is generally referring to F11, F16, and try about a 4-minute exposure. If you're just starting out in this, if you've never done this process before, I recommend that you stay close to your dark room or your dark box or whatever you're processing in, and where you can get light tight, and do a test plate. Do a small one. Start small, just like you did with wet collodion, and figure out what your exposures are. Figure out where your light is. Figure out your situation. Keep track of your exposure times, your how big your aperture you're using, et cetera, et cetera. Well, says, I've tried using coffee as the tannin, though my plates came out quite flat, needed to be viewed with lots of reflected light. Might need to revisit. Yes, do that, Will. Get some tannin. This is the density. It does cause sensitivity issues like he's talking about, but this is what's going to give you that vigor, non-feeble, as he says, negatives. This is going to give you that punch you need. So definitely, Will, do that. You'll have a whole different experience. So about 400 minutes, sunlighted, P-stop aperture. And for other lenses in proportion. Expose for the dark shadows, not for the highlights. Overexposure can be remedied in development, but underexposure cannot. The death of dry plate is underexposure, not overexposure. Underexposure, right? So err on the side of overexposure, which most wet collodionists do anyway. So err for the overexposure, not underexposure. That's what he's saying there. Yeah, always err on the side of over rather than under. It may be mentioned here that much greater sensitivity may be given to the tannin plates by employing a mixture of tannin and gum arabic. And here's where his rapid dry process starts to reveal itself, the gum arabic. We'll talk about that. We're going to briefly go over his process there. So if you want a little more speed, you want to cut those exposures down, employ a little bit of gum arabic in your tannin. And the sensitivity will increase according to the gum as the gum predominates. But this remark is only true when bromo-iodized collodion is used. With simply iodized collodion, tannin only must be used. So if you're trying to make negatives with iodized only collodion, all you can use is tannin. If you're going to use tannin and gum, use bromo-iodized. I recommend you use bromo-iodized collodion just to start out with anyway. And then the exposure must be longer than above stated. Tannin is the only preservative which will answer well with simply iodized collodion. Let's talk about development. There are two ways of developing a tannin plate. I will describe the simplest plan first. I think we're only going to go here. We're not going to go into the mercury and things like that. But here we go. Pour over the plate a small quantity mixture of 1 part alcohol to 2 parts water. So you've gone out, you've made your exposure, you come back in, you pull the plate from the plate holder, right? And here's what you have to do. This is I call this kind of reactivating it. or sensitive, getting it ready to develop, right? It's making it, it's already sensitive, but it's sensitive for development. So pour over the plate a small quantity of 1 part alcohol to 2 parts distilled water, right? In it, whatever quantity you want. Let this flow to all edges of the corners as to moisten the film thoroughly, right? Don't be afraid to leave it on there, kind of like your iodine when you're redeveloping a negative. Just let it flow for a bit. Then drain it off and pour the following solution on it. Distilled water, pyroglycic acid, and glacial acetic acid. There you go. 28.9 mils, 0.13 grams of pyro, and 2.5 mils of glacial acetic acid. 2 scruples. To which add immediately before use a few drops of 20-grain solution of silver nitrate. That's a 4.4 solution of silver bath, right? A week, about half as your normal. If you're doing positives, about half that. You could dilute that down. You could take 10 mils of your 8.8 or 9% silver bath and add 10 mils of water, and you'll have about a 4.5-5% solution. Just like pyro developing, add a few drops of this before you pour it on your dry plate. The mixture of alcohol and water is better than water for moistening the plate because it prevents the film from leaving the glass. This is really important, and chipping too. We'll talk about that. The picture comes out very quickly, and the development must be carefully watched in order to avoid getting too much density in the blacks. So, Steve has a comment here. Is he suggesting to do this in a tray, a leveling stand, hand holding? Good question, Steve. If you read Sutton's material, he's a big advocate of the stand. He's a big advocate of having like a daguerreotype gilding stand. He's a big advocate of that. I do them by hand. I pour collodion by hand. I develop by hand. I like everything by hand. I could brace myself on the corner of my darkroom sink, that kind of stuff. So good question. He's probably advocating a stand here, but he doesn't mention it, ironically enough. But in the past, I'm just deducing that he's probably mentioning a stand. So alcohol and water is better than just water because of the peeling, the lifting of the collodion. Picture comes out quickly and must be carefully watched so you don't get the big relief on the sky, so to speak. Steve, if you follow this, you're going to find on and off, kind of like redevelopment. This is going to develop a lot like a negative, a wet collodion negative. I don't know why people talk about 5 and 10 minute developer times on dry collodion. Because I'm not there, I don't know. But this will come out rapidly, like he said. This pyro and glacial acetic acid distilled water developer. Pour it on, watch it. I move it around. You can drain it out, pour it back on. If you want, watch it, move it around. It'll come out quite quickly. Jeffrey says, does it matter how old the collodion to use for the dry process? No, it doesn't really. You're not going to, the tannin is the sensitivity. If you're using a redder collodion, that's not going to make a difference here because the tannin's already interfering with that. So as far as exposure goes. So I hope that makes sense, Steve, but yeah. So it's going to come out quickly, very quickly, and the development must be carefully watched. So if Steve said, well, no, I have to process mine for a longer and longer time, it's either exposure or your developer or your tannin or whatever it might be, right? And especially if you throw a little gum arabic in with the tannin, you're really going to speed things up for exposure. But this will come out relatively like a wet collodion negative, a restrained developer, all that stuff. But when he says quickly, it's quickly for dry plate. So that's kind of the gist there. Fixing and varnishing. Pour over the plate a saturated solution of hypo and let it flow over every part until the whole of the silver iodide is dissolved out. We know how to fix a plate, right? Fix it just like normal, like you normally would. And then when dry, varnish the film with spirit varnish in the manner described before, the negative now finish. And we talked about a gum sandarak or a shellac, extra blonde. I like to use that more clear stuff on my negatives. I've used tons of gum sandarak on my negatives as well. A mix of all the above. Okay. Well, Steve, let's employ you to give this a shot, and make sure you document your exposure times. And when he talks about a p-stop, maybe F11, F16 on a well-lit day using his formulas, his tannin, his proportions, and his developer, and his silver bath, and see what happens. Yes, Malik, can you say anything about gum arabic? Just a standard and then just a little. Yes, sorry. He doesn't really say, mix this much or mix that much. If you want to really get a burst in this, do half tannin and half gum arabic, right? Just do half and half. And when we go into his rapid dry process, the catch here is all gum arabic. So that's his little trick, and he pulled a patent on that process, which is interesting. So you could start with a quarter. You could start with you're not going to hurt anything. Nothing's going to change for you that way. So it is very, you've got a lot of latitude there. You're not going to hurt anything. So if I use my normal collodion, cadmium, and ammonium iodide, yes, perfect, Fareed. That is, you've got a bromide and an iodide. That's what you want. Bromo-iodized collodion for this process. If you're using the tannin, right? If you're using only iodized collodion, you have to use the tannin, but you can use the gum arabic. I say just do that. Steve, please come back and let us know. I would love to see what happens with you on that. I mean, a little added to the tannin. Yes, just like I said, a latitude. You can, no problem. You can add as much or as little. What I would recommend if you try this, and start out with 4x5 or some small plates to do this. They're easier to handle, fewer material. You can make this up in 100 ml batches, things like that, little tiny. You don't use much collodion, blah, blah, blah. Start with 4x5. Run the tannin only. Do your 4-minute, 5-minute exposure with your F11, F16, depending on your light. And then mix up a little batch with a quarter gum arabic, 3/4 tannin, then half gum arabic, half tannin, and see your differences. The problem with all this is your optic and your type of light. My exposures are going to be much, much different up here at 3,000 meters than your exposures at sea level. It's just, and what optic are you using, kind of thing too, So just play with it. This is just all kind of experimental, but Steve, I think you might get a big boost out of this if you try this and see if your times don't improve, the density of your negatives, everything like that. Tannin negatives have this serious defect. Check this out. That the film is very liable to be chipped in printing. Great care must be taken always. Use a sensitive paper, quite dry, in order that it may not stick to the film. These break off. It becomes even varnished. It chips. It can chip. It's not malleable at all. So if you have a little bit of damp paper, you peel it off, you're going to pull your pieces of your negative off. The densest part of the negative, where there is the most reduced silver, are the most liable to chip. In printing from a very valuable negatives, it has been customary now to protect it with a sheet of mica against the film. So a lot of people do this. They'll put, printing out, the printing out processes that we're talking about. You can use a thin piece of like a scrim paper, a thin piece of rice paper, or something to break that light up. He's talking about mica here, just a thin, clear piece of material that it won't affect the image. It's just perfectly clean and clear, but you have no chance of having it stick or chip off in the paper. That's really what he's talking about there. And the edges of the sheet of mica should be gummed at the edges of the negative, meaning stick it on there. The other method of developing a tannin negative consists of adding some gallic acid to dilute alcohol, which is first poured over the plate. And after the film has been wetted with this, adding a few drops of silver acetate nitrate, aceto nitrate to it, and developing the picture. We'll get to that in a certain stage with this mixture before intensifying it with pyrogalo-nitrate. In this way, softer negatives are obtained. This is a little more involved. I'll go through this, but don't really pay too much attention to it. Stick with what we've gone through if you're going to try this, but just for general purpose. The alcoholic mixture is made by adding 1 part of pure alcohol to 2 parts of saturated solution of gallic acid in water and filtered. The acetonitrate is made by dissolving 20 grains of silver nitrate, 1 ounce of distilled water, and adding 20 minims of glacial acetic acid. Saturated solutions of gallic acid is made by adding 4 grains of gallic acid to 1 ounce of distilled water, shaking it up well for a few minutes and filtering. Negatives developed in this way are more full of detail, more harmonious, and not so dense by the first method. Well, if you're just starting out with this, you can come back to this and do this method. Just go with a glacial acetic acid developer. Yes, you're going to get dense negative. You're going to print them anyway. He's trying to refine this and take that tannin density away a little bit. That's what he's talking about here. The fall of the tannin process is tendency to excessive density and hardness. Underexposure and overdevelopment must be both carefully avoided. That's the biggest problem I see people making. They're underexposing and overdeveloping. Some persons use citric instead of acetic acid in the developer. The former gives a black and the latter gives a red. Doesn't really matter. In other respects, does not seem to make much difference between them. Citric acid is sold in crystals, etc., etc. 1 grain of citric acid should be used for every grain of pyro. So that's, if you want to use citric, just match it up with the pyro. So it goes on to say, the tannin process is most suitable for printing transparent positives on glass. Isn't that interesting? The plate must be prepared the exact same way as for a negative, except that it's better to use iodized and not bromo-iodized collodion. So he's going back and forth a little bit here, but try the process like we've described, and you'll find it's just a couple of extra little steps. Dry a few plates, do the tannin, dry a few plates, and then expose and develop them and see what you get. And if anybody does that, I know Steve will probably definitely do it, but if anybody else does that, come back and share with us. I'd love to see what you do. For instance, I guess the final wash will be around 30 minutes. Yes, just like the regular, if you're making positives and you're using hypo in this case, go ahead and wash in running water for 20 or 30 minutes. Yes, exactly right. A fresh solution of hypo. So let's quickly go over Sutton's rapid dry process. This is where he took a patent out on this. This is interesting. So here's the big change. Don't worry about the first step. You could use gelatin for that, but he's using India rubber. It's a manufacturing rubber, and he's just coating the plate with that. And then he goes on, number 2, coat the plate thus prepared with the bromo-iodized collodion, equal number of atoms of iodine and bromine, meaning equal combination there, added with the cadmium. There should be about 5 grains of mixed iodide and bromide of cadmium to the ounce of silver. Basically the same, equal amounts. Excite, and he's bringing the bromides up for a reason here, for sensitivity, and he's going to talk about that. Excite the film in the bath composed of 30 grains, a recrystallized silver, slightly acidic with nitric acid, same thing. Wash off all the free silver, pour over the film, a preservative composed of 25 grains of gum. So here we go. Let's look down in the bubble here. I just translated all this stuff. So if you're going to do 250 mils of collodion, 2.7 grams of each CDI, cadmium iodide, and cadmium bromide. The bath should be 65.5 grams of Agno-3 in 1 liter at pH 4. The gum, Arabic, 13.5 grams of gum Arabic to 250 mils of DH2O. And the developer, 1.1 gram of pyro to 250 DH2O, 22 mils of glacial acetic acid, and 10 drops of 4% Agno-3. So that's what he's talking about, number 4. Freshly dissolved. Let it dry spontaneously, meaning put it up on your little wood blocks and just walk away, let it dry. And before putting it in the plate, dry it again thoroughly before a hot flat iron. Meaning just run it over and make sure it is dry. And it'll equal out drying like he talked about if you just let it dry naturally or spontaneously. Number 5, give the same exposure for wet collodion. Woohoo! Same exposure for wet collodion. Check that out. So you can see where that gum Arabic just changes the whole ball game here on exposure. The tannin slows that down. The gum Arabic speeds it up. So if you went out and you had an F16 exposure of 10 seconds on your wet collodion, a nice negative of wet collodion at 10 or 20 seconds, do the same for the dry. That changes the game, right? That's number 5. Give the same exposure as wet collodion. 6, develop the picture by first wetting it with distilled water. And he doesn't mention alcohol here, but distilled water and then pouring over, probably because gum won't have the tendency to lift. And then pouring, the Indian rubber, sorry. Then pouring over a developer consisting of 1 ounce of distilled water, 2 grains of pyrogallic acid, 2 scruples of, you see the developer down there, et cetera, et cetera. A few drops of weak solution. The image appears immediately and very soon acquires a necessary intensity or density. 7, fix the negative in the usual way with a standard solution of hypo. When dry, varnish it with a spirit varnish. And then he says down here, I have lately solved this problem of rapid dry collodion and produced dry plates as sensitive as wet ones, which will moreover preserve their sensitivity and good qualities for several weeks and perhaps indefinitely. So he said you can make these plates and, shoot them and process them months or maybe indefinitely, years later. This process and the principles upon which it's based, I will now briefly describe. And that's what we just did there. Interesting, right? I thought that was very, very telling. Yeah, give it a try. Everybody should give it a try. How would you do test exposures, Jeffrey asked? Lighting conditions will be different in the field. Yes. What I recommend is you work from your studio or darkroom locally, like just in your place. Don't take it out in the field the first time, because you'll be off and you won't know that, and you'll have to go back. Just work with it. Use basically the same light the day. If you have a nice bright day, run your test during them and find out what your exposures might be at F11 or F16, somewhere in there, and run your plates and see. And then that'll give you a good estimate as you go out in the field with the same light conditions. You could even meter it. Not that that's going to matter, just for your reference to say, oh, this is 2 stops different from that, so I'm going to, whatever, it's not quite the same, or do different tests like that. And that's what you need to do. You need to run it locally and then go out and run it. So yes, it is fascinating. I thought it was too, Steve. I'm excited to try some of these things myself. I'm getting close again. What's the 1 gram in the developer? Yes, it is. The developer is 1.1 gram of pyro to 250 mils of distilled water, 22 mils of glacial acidic acid. I almost swore there. Glacial acidic acid. And 10 drops of 4% silver nitrate. Yes, it is, Fareed. That's exactly right. Yeah, this is really interesting. So you could mix and match here a little bit, like Malik asked about the gum arabic in the tannin. Try the tannin first. Your exposures are going to be quite long. Then add some gum arabic to it and see how you can bump that exposure up. And if you want to go all gum arabic, the only thing I would say is you'd have to probably do an albumin coating. You'd have to substitute the number 1 on this, because India rubber and kerosene that's not kerosene. It's a cold product. It's different. And these products aren't readily available. And we wouldn't even know how to use them in this process. But you need some kind of adhesive down there. So albumin, something to hold, maybe gelatin, something like that. But if you just mix tannin and gum arabic together, you're going to have a great result there. How about an iron substitute instead of pyro? That's a great question, Steve. Here's what I've learned. And normally, if you've redeveloped with a ferrous sulfate or iron and pyro versus pyro, you'll know that it works. It just takes longer. The problem that I have reading this primary or old literature is they're calling for specific compounds. And if you vary from that, your results may be drastically different. So I would probably say no on this. If you're going to try to do it try to follow his method, especially the tannin. Not the rapid dry, but they're either one of them. But if you're going to follow the tannin, I would definitely use pyro. You could try iron and see what happens. I think it would be quite a bit slower. But yeah, awesome. Yes, I'm excited. I thought you guys out there making wet collodion would be interested in popping on and doing this as a couple of additional steps. And really, honestly giving you some really great dense negatives and allowing you to take a few film holders and your camera out and go up into wherever and make exposures and come back and develop a week later, a month later, whatever you wanted to do. There's a lot of advantages here. You just have to get over a couple of obstacles. But please share with us, Drew, if you do that. Pyro means pyrogallic acid. Pyrogallic acid. That's what it is. Pyro. We call it pyro. It's pyrogallic acid. Not so. Don't confuse it with other things, pyromaniacs and everything like that. Pyro is pyrogallic acid. This is amazing. I've gotten thin eggs at 30 minutes. Oh, no. Yes, absolutely. You guys out there. Oh, wow. Yeah, I won't do that. I was going to show you a video, but I'll restrain myself. I see this all the time. Try this method. You'll love it. Maybe not the rapid dry right away. Try the tannin and the gum, or just the tannin, and go from there. You'll find it great. I'm glad you like it. 30 minutes developing. Ooh, that sounds like you're doing calotypes. So there it was. There's his techniques and methods for dry collodion, both the Major Russell's tannin gum arabic, and then the rapid dry that he took Sutton's own patent out on with just the gum arabic. So if you have any questions, we'll come back to this. You can just holler at me, but you'll find this. We did this in the studio in Denver all the time. We made some great negatives. It was just great. I mean, it just works wonderfully. Granted, I know I'm in Denver, or was in Denver. I'm in Colorado where the sun shines. It's bright, a lot of UV. Your mileage may vary, but if you get that exposure down and you follow his recipes, just like everything else we've talked about here, you'll have luck. Just practice a little bit. And if you're doing the wet collodion process, this will be fun for you. All you'd have to do is maybe pick up a little bit of tannin, and if you're not doing negatives, you might have to pick up a little bit of pyro. But that's about it. So this week, negative, positive history of photography. You know, I love Jeffrey Batchen. He's a British writer. Wonderful books. I've got a ton of his books back here. I'm getting my bookshelf set up. You see that? I'm getting there. I'm getting there slowly but surely. I still have some down in the studio I have to pack in, but life's short and complicated. I'm not going to try dry plate, but dry plate. Yeah. Yeah. Is that a technical question, Pablo? So, dry collodion is not for everyone for sure. But if you're looking for a way to be more mobile, less gear, less stress, accessibility, there's a lot of advantages to it. There really is a lot of advantages to it. And if you get it down and nail it down, you'll have both wet and dry you can play with. And honestly, these few extra steps, like I said, are just, I'd tack it on a wet plate positive workshop most of the time. Just if we had a couple hours extra with everybody to go out and make a negative. And I mean, it's not a big deal. Really, it isn't, especially if you're doing the wet process. So negative, positive history. As its title suggests, it begins with the negative, foundational element of analog photography that is nonetheless usually ignored, and uses this to tell representative rather than a comprehensive history of the medium. Really good book. Again, I agree with him. The negative is overlooked, I think, especially today, because of the positive craze is just incredible. It has been for, last 10 or 15 years anyway. But at the end of the day, what you really want to be able to do is produce multiple prints and multiple variations of prints and in toning and processes and all that. And you can only do that with the negative. And I know people, this is my personal opinion. People will work in positives for a certain amount of time, and then they'll kind of burn out on them or get I don't want to say bored with them, but just the oxytocin in your brain's kind of gone from, you're not in love with it so much anymore, and you want something new. Humans naturally want to progress. And the negative is the next natural progression. And a lot of folks can't do negatives, or they can't print very well, or they don't understand it very well. It's a little more complex. It takes a little more energy and effort. So a lot of folks never go there. But if you're serious about photography and printing, and a negative will do wonders in the commercial world for you. You don't just have one image, you can have multiple images. You can have multiple varieties of images, toned differently, processed differently. The negative does open up a whole new world. But a great book if you're into it. Yes, dry plate positives. Yes, there is this process. Yeah, just like positives, right? There's no real positives in wet plate, Thilo. You know that. They're underexposed negatives when you use them to back the light. This is where you might benefit from an iron developer, and you might benefit from a gum Arabic solution and lose some of that density. Yes, you can play with that for sure, absolutely. Malay, another tech. Do you always albuminize gelatinized glass, or is he saying you can just do this on a clean plate? On the tannin only, you can do this. Just you don't have to albuminize. The dry Sutton's rapid dry process. Let me go back here. That's what we were looking at here. He's talking about getting the plate basically albuminized or coated with this India rubber and this coal kind of stuff. But this, you can see right off the bat here, he's just saying collodionize the plate. There's no, clean it, of course. And you could, if you wanted to, albuminize it, but there's nothing special there, Malik. Good question. There's nothing special there. Clean your plate well, like you're making a negative, and go for it. And that's what you'll do, is you'll make a beautiful negative. And Thilo, so yes, so good book. Check it out. He's got Fox Talbot, he's got Dorothea Lange, he's got Richard Avedon, all kinds of great people in there. Joel Peter Whitkin, I know I've talked about and recognized and advanced or recommended him before and advocated for his work. He is changing. I just saw online, I didn't go to his show. I just saw a show where he had, and I was in Paris several years ago and saw one of his shows there. He started doing this. He's now introducing a lot of drawings and different things like that in his work, and really going kind of multimedia. It's really interesting. But if you haven't watched this documentary, you should watch it. I put a link up for the first 30 minutes of it or so. But let me play this and just check it out here.
Joel Peter Whitkin, who is he? He's a photographer, an artist, a visionary. This is someone who's a spiritual reformer and who's trying to, when you look at a picture of his, get you to look deeply inside yourself, and you don't escape. And the ones who do escape by sort of brushing off their clothes and saying, "Get me out of here. I'm out of here, man. This guy's a ghoul." It's easy. The hard part is to stay with the pictures. And those who do are amply rewarded.
My life experience and growing has been part of my work in my life. So my life, my work are inseparable.
For Joel, everyone's a saint, and everyone's a saint who's earned its sainthood through suffering. This is why he's very attracted to maimed people who are suffering from illness like AIDS, people who are transsexual, transgender, people who cross the line. And I think for many people who have not self-examined very much, what he does looks like an outrage, like some attempt to shock the public. And it goes far beyond that, I think.
You have to have the courage to engage an idea and see it through. And I've never said, I can't do this. I try, because even if it doesn't work out and not everything works out, no one bats 1,000. If a photograph doesn't work out, I put it aside. I feel decimated, but usually it comes back as a reality later on.
He really loves these people. He loves every single person. There isn't anyone that he photographs that he doesn't really feel a deep compassion and affection for, or I don't think he could do the work.
Yeah, you should watch that. It's a great overview on his work. You can find it at witkenmovie.com. One thing I wanted to show you before I leave. Somebody posted, I was going to put this up on, absolutely, Malay, there's no problem. I was going to put this up on my social media thing, but let me zoom out here. Where am I here? I was going to put this up on my social media thing, but somebody talked about, and I'm just getting this ready to put up. I put up a bunch of work in my place here. I don't know if you can see all this stuff, but I've got a bunch of work put up and all over, and I'm just putting this up in my office here. Somebody talked about, which was a really interesting point. We've had this discussion before at times, but I think his name was Michael. I don't know the gentleman, but he talked about, I think it was him. He talked about all photographs being round, right? Everything crops it. The camera crops it. Really what he's talking about is the image circle. And it reminded me of a couple of things. Primarily, it reminded me of this image from Barcelona. They made this is out of the Archer show, and I'll put the link up. You can go watch the video how they made this. It's round, obviously, which really makes it, and it's going to go up right behind me here. I'm just getting it ready right now. I just got it out of the studio this morning. It really reminded me of that image, and it's so true that that we have this whole idea. The camera crops it. So I did a whole series on what I called keyhole. Looking through a keyhole, looking at something you shouldn't see, and that's using a small lens on a larger plate. Mine were whole plate using a 22 or 220 millimeter lens. And it's true. I love the round image look. It's fascinating. Let me grab that and put that link up just before I leave, so you guys can see that. I did. I did put it over here. The Barcelona crew is. I don't think they're together anymore. I don't know. I haven't heard from them in years, but I'll put this link up here regardless. Oh yeah. Okay. Right here, and then I'll bid you farewell. Right here, copy link address. Okay, let's see. Let's put it up over here. There it is in YouTube. And you're very welcome, Jeffrey. Thanks for coming in. And yes, absolutely. Thank you, Drew and Christina. Yes, I hope you guys have a great week. I don't know what we're doing next week. We'll figure something out. If you have somebody or something you want to show, bring on, show some work, talk about it. We can do that. Maybe Steve will come back. I always learn something every time you're true. Oh, thank you, brother. I just want to share a little bit with the community. I do. I'm preoccupied with photography. I love it. It's been my life. It's been my career, a couple of careers. And I just want to share. And if people find it interesting, great. If you don't, that's fine too. If it's not your thing here, it's okay. Everybody's got a different learning style and different people they learn from and enjoy, and it's all good. So take it and come back next week, Steve and Will and Drew and anybody that wants to try that dry plate and share with me. If you do it through the week, get a hold of me, send me an email, and we'll continue on and look at that. But for now, thank you for joining me. I appreciate your time. Have a great rest of the day, evening, afternoon, morning, whatever it is, or whenever you're watching it. Stay healthy and happy, and I hope to see you next Saturday. Ciao. Bye-bye, Jeffrey.